The final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number S4M 05-676 in the name of Christina-McKelvie on Voices from the Frontline Digital by Default. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who would like to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons now. I call on Christina-McKelvie to open the debate, and you have 7 minutes in which to do so.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Before I go into the detail of what I want to bring forward to the debate, can I pay special tribute to Citizens Advice Scotland and thank them very much for the valuable work they do in informing us in our role, but not only that, but the valuable work they do day in and day out in our communities. And can I make special mention of the CAB in Hamilton, who have been absolutely fantastic at supporting me in what I do and certainly supporting my constituents. I would also like to say thank you to the members who signed the motion to allow this motion to be debated as members' business also. This is not just politics, this is people's lives. That's what Tracy, a neighbour of Stephanie Bottrell in Solihull, the grandmother who threw herself in front of a lorry on the M6 on Saturday, said about her tragic death. And she added, Stephanie wouldn't be the last to die as a result of the bedroom tax. And as some newspapers have also reported, Mrs Bottrell killed herself because she said she couldn't afford to live. Her 2 adult children had left home to set up their own family lives, and she was assessed and told she must pay £20 a week for under-occupied rooms. She had lived in a £320 a month house for 18 years, but there was no way that she could find the extra £80 a month out of her limited income. Stephanie suffered from a debilitating condition, myasthenia gravis, and was far too weak to be able to work. This painful reality is a testament to Westminster's uncaring government, to David Cameron and George Osborne's conviction that if you pull the carpet from under the feet of vulnerable people, they'll jump up bouncing and join the workforce. This is simply discrimination. It victimises those without the advantages of Messrs Cameron and Osborne have enjoyed. Mr Cameron, life isn't like that, not in Scotland and not in most parts of England and Wales away from the cushy constituencies of the South East. The recent report from Citizens Advice Scotland, Voices from the Frontline, and today's release of a follow-up report, Offline and Left Behind, highlights a whole range of real-life suffering as a direct result of the so-called welfare reform policy. These are real people, like Mrs Bottrell, who are pushed and shoved to the edge because they don't meet the neatly streamlined criteria the coalition government have set down. Already at a disadvantage in terms of their health outlook, prosperity, career prospects and vulnerability to issues like drug and alcohol abuse, the outcome of this Westminster policy is to push them to the limit. Perhaps they hope that, like the internet, this approach will change lives. Many of us sit in the train, tapping into our Blackberries and smartphones, checking up on the breaking news and firing off emails or reading information about an event that we've got on in the evening. When we return to our offices, we can access a huge wealth of information and stay up to date with 24-hour news. Citizens Advice Scotland has found that the personal experience for their clients reveal a technological disadvantage, along with all the other ones that benefit claimants already endure. Only 53% of Citizens Advice Scotland clients use the internet. Just 24% said they would be able to apply for a benefit on their own with no problem. A total of 76% said they would struggle to apply for a benefit online, including 39% who said they could not apply online at all. 72% said they would struggle to apply for a job online, given that just 55% of Citizens Advice Scotland's clients have a computer at home. Perhaps that's not surprising. The internet is by no means a universal service available to everyone. The report details evidence that shows how people are already being denied benefits to which they are entitled and having benefits taken away from them because they cannot access or use the internet. They ask that the UK Government ensures that citizens are fully supported to access the benefits to which they are entitled in a way which suits their needs, resources and capabilities. In addition, benefit claimants who do not have access to the internet or who are less able to use it to apply for benefits online or jobs must not be penalised for this. Rather, We believe that job centres have a key role to play in supporting people to gain skills and find work, and that government more broadly has a duty to support the rollout of the internet access. In November 2012, the UK Government launched its Government Digital Strategy. The paper sets out how the Government will transform the way it delivers services to citizens, including moving services online, a change in ethos to digital by default. It came along at the same time as the unprecedented changes to the welfare system, which, coupled with at least £18 billion of cuts to the welfare budget, will cause significant upheaval for those in receipt of benefits. Citizens Advice Scotland says it is concerned that a digital by default approach to welfare benefits could exclude some of the most vulnerable and marginalised members of society from accessing the very services that they rely on. A more cynical person than I might suggest that this is yet another useful Westminster mechanism to cut down on the volume and backlog of applications. It is a perfect example, though, of the bizarre way in which the Westminster Government looks at its electorate. I am reminded of Nelson looking down his telescope with his blind eye and saying, "I see nothing." The digital issue is a microcosm that reveals the Westminster attitude. Only with independence can we give people back their dignity, help and encourage them to access the benefits they have a right to, and support those who really need that intervention. The wider implications of the so-called benefit reforms are well known to this chamber, but as Citizen Advice reports on, it shows that around £2.5 billion will be taken out of the Scottish economy in the lifetime of the Westminster Government. Invariably, it is the most vulnerable who will suffer most heavily. Disabled people in Scotland stand to lose over £1 billion, equating to a 29% cut. Successive British governments have pushed vulnerable people to the edge in Scotland. With independence, we could do something much better. We can work, as we are already doing within our limited powers, to build more communities, to build more within communities, rather than slapping on the depersonalised solution from all of the above. If we are to make a more equal society a reality in Scotland, then we need to do it independently. London solutions may or may not work in London, but they don't work in Scotland, and they certainly don't work in Solihull.
Thank you. We now turn to the open debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. Malcolm Chisholm, to be followed by Richard Lyle.
I congratulate Christina-McKelvie on bringing forward this debate, and also, of course, Citizens Advice Scotland, because of the Voices-From-the-Frontline reports. They've produced several, but the one that's highlighted in this motion is digital by default, and I'll concentrate on that, plus one that by chance has come out today called Offline and Left Behind, because they're both dealing with the same theme. I mean, I agree with most of what Christina-McKelvie said about welfare reform, apart from the constitutional context in which she placed it. But today's debate is particularly focusing on the digital issue. And in today's report, Offline and Left Behind, we're reminded that a total of 76% of CAB clients said they would struggle to apply for a benefit online, and that nearly three-quarters of CAB clients said they would struggle to apply for a job online. So those are actually the basic facts underlying the debate today. Now, some of that, of course, is an issue of training and skills, but there's also a fundamental issue of access, because today's report also tells us that only half of CAB clients, well, 54%, have an internet connection at home, and that shouldn't really surprise us, because those of us who were doing work on this quite recently remember that the Ofcom market report highlighted that only 50% of adults in Glasgow, the whole population of Glasgow, have fixed broadband. So there are clearly issues of training and of access, and that means that though the aim of getting more people online is a good one, the UK Government's target of moving 80% of benefit applications online in a short period of time is very worrying and, frankly, misguided and wrong. But it's not, of course, just the accessibility of benefit claims that is at stake, but also the way in which unemployed people apply for new positions. We're effectively seeing the penalisation of those who have not been given the ability to navigate a relatively complex online system in a way that undermines their efforts and reinforces the notion that they have been left out of society altogether. Where is the justice or fairness in that? The extent of the penalisation of employment prospects through this shift towards digital is underlined in the digital by default report that's highlighted in the motion. CAC cites a body of evidence that, and I quote here, showed instances of people being penalised at the job centre for not applying for jobs online. This was even found to have happened when people had applied for jobs in writing or by phone due to their inability to use a computer. Organisations that provide information and advice for concerns claimants will undoubtedly have a great deal more to deal with over the coming period of transition to the new online system. Therefore, it is essential that bodies like Citizens Advice Scotland are supported and properly equipped to cope with the change. While the DWP have stated that they will provide face-to-face contact with claimants completing a form in exceptional circumstances, it still needs to be made absolutely clear to the public what these circumstances will be, and they must be defined in a realistic and sensitive way. And like Christina-McKelvie, I would like to pay tribute to all the work of the Citizens Advice Bureaus in Edinburgh and Leith, and I know several people in them have been involved in these reports, so I pay particular tribute to them. Now, of course, libraries are often quoted as a place where people can go, but clearly there are sometimes issues about the availability of libraries as well, with 200 public libraries closed across the UK last year. I'm not sure how many of those are in Scotland. So we must ensure that changes are implemented with respect to individual circumstances, and we must argue for a framework of provision that is digital by design rather than digital by default, working to tackle issues of accessibility rather than simply ignoring the immense challenges faced by those who lack computer skills or don't have access to one or both. In conclusion, consider the case of the 60-year-old crowd who was sanctioned for 2 weeks on the basis that he left no digital trace of his job search, but who had been applying in person and over the phone. When he asked how he would eat for 2 weeks, the adviser told him that it wasn't the job centre's problem. This cannot become standard practice when budgets and human resources are increasingly stretched, and we have a duty to make sure that all of those experiencing difficulty are treated with consideration and respect.
Many thanks. Richard Lyle, to be followed by Alex Johnston.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by thanking Christina-McKelvie for bringing forward this motion on an issue that is so important at this present time, and welcome the opportunity to debate it here today in the Chamber. Having read through the report Voices from the Frontline, Digital by Default by Citizens Advice Scotland, I too share the views that are expressed, and also the concerns raised by both Inclusion Scotland and Citizens Advice Scotland that those people who are already facing barriers will find it even more difficult to get online. When looking deeper into the issue, I looked at the research from the Carnegie Trust, which had a fantastic case study on digital exclusion in Glasgow and why it's so that Glasgow has such a low broadband uptake. The figure for that particular case study struck me was over 90% in some specific groups are offline. Groups including older people, social housing tenants and people who are unemployed are the least likely to be online. This issue, coupled with the fact that those who are already facing difficulties in the day-to-day life through disability, proves how out of touch the Westminster Government truly is, not only with the people of Scotland, but with the people throughout the rest of the UK. The extent by which the Westminster Government is out of touch is highlighted by their action over the bedroom tax. They wanted 90,000 people to move house in a year. In my 36 years as a service as a local authority councillor in North Lanarkshire Council, I managed to only help 5,000 people to move. How could they suggest that 90,000 people could move in a year? The facts, however, are more damning, Presiding Officer. Studies have shown that disabled people are significantly less likely to live in households with access to the internet than non-disabled people. In 2010, 58% of disabled people in the UK lived in households with internet access, compared to 84% of non-disabled people. This is according to the British Social Attitudes Survey 2010 and runs in line with the review by the Scottish Government titled Digital Participation in Scotland, a Review of the Evidence. The reasons outlined in the review for the low figures of internet access to those with disability are twofold. One, because of impairment as a result of disability, and two, of a lower income. An example of such impairment is of people with visual impairments who face practical difficulties in using the internet. There are particular problems in reading what is displayed and in finding your way around many websites as a result of them not being fully accessible, to name but a few. Then, taking the issue of lower income, there is natural correlation that those who have higher income are more likely to have internet access at home. Currently, only 52% of people in the 15% most deprived communities have internet access in their homes, and with disabled people being one of the groups most likely to be living on a lower income. In turn, therefore, disabled people are most likely to be living on a low income and thus with a need to claim benefits, but those less likely have internet access. This is why the Westminster Government's plans for digital as default, I believe, are poorly thought out and show a lack of concern for the most vulnerable in our society. I would urge the Westminster Government to relook at their policy, their bedroom tax. This is causing significant worry, despair and, as already has been said by Christina-McKelvie, caused the regrettable suicide of a young woman. This is a policy that is even worse than the poll tax, and the only conclusion I can draw is how, as a country here in Scotland, can we rid ourselves of this unfair and undemocratic policies is through the powers of an independent Scotland. I again thank Christina-McKelvie for bringing this debate to defend the people that Westminster has forgotten.
Thank you very much. Alec Johnston, to be followed by Dennis Robertson.
And Deputy Presiding Officer, I start with the same words as Christina-McKelvie used at the opening of her speech, and that is that this is not about politics, this is about people's lives. And when we deal with the issues surrounding welfare reform, we all have to accept that we have a responsibility to ensure that assistance is given wherever it can be, and that people understand the availability of assistance. It is therefore important that I take this opportunity to pay tribute to Citizens Advice Scotland and the work that they do and continue to do to support vulnerable people through these difficult times as we change the welfare system substantially. The purpose of that reform was fundamentally to ensure that resources go to those who need them most and that the resources available are targeted to where they can be most effective and provide the best support for those in need. However, there is always an inbuilt inertia to any system, and resistance to change is one of the things that we must not be trapped into allowing to be the centre of this policy. On the issue of digital by default, the decision by the UK Government to go for a system which would target 80% of applications being online is one which has stirred up a degree of controversy. However, there are a couple of things that have to be said in relation to this. First of all, the information that has been made available by Citizens Advice Scotland is information based on their client group. And even a cursory examination of the figures will indicate that their client group is not statistically particularly similar to the broader society as a whole. And consequently, the figures that are produced relating to their client group do not necessarily include these who are able to make their applications by digital means, so they have been excluded from the figure. In fact, on the evidence that was given before the Welfare Reform Committee only this morning from Department of Work and Pensions officials suggested that across the country as a whole, 50% of applications are now made by the online route, and that even in Scotland, some areas, Orkney for example, have already achieved the 80% online target. So there is an indication there that this can be achieved. Furthermore, it was made clear that the target is 80%, not 100%, and that there is a deep understanding of the fact that there will be difficulty for some individuals. As a consequence of this, money has been made available to support the activities of Citizens Advice Scotland so that they can contribute towards assisting people. Also, the staff at job centres should be in a position to assist individuals in making online applications at the job centre. Now, I am aware that there are no shortage of individual stories where this perhaps has not happened and where difficulty has been experienced. But it is our duty as politicians to highlight these difficulties and ensure that the necessary support is provided in future and that individuals are not exposed to the difficulties that have been mentioned. As many people in this chamber will know, I am fully supportive of the need for welfare reform, and I will continue to support the UK Government in achieving their objective. But that does not mean to say that it is not the duty of everyone in this chamber to ensure that we protect individuals from individually identified cases of difficulty and that we bring forward the problems so that they can be solved as part of the implementation process. We all have that duty, and we should all be working together to ensure that we don't just complain, that we actually make this thing work for the benefit of Scotland's people.
Thank you. Dennis Robertson, to be followed by Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like others, can I thank Christina-McKelvie for bringing this very important debate to the Chamber this evening. Presiding Officer, in listening to Alex Johnson, it would appear that he is looking for excuses to excuse the inexcusable. Presiding Officer, in the more remote and rural areas of Scotland, there isn't connectivity to enable people. And this is perhaps maybe why the Westminster Government set their targets at 80%. But I would ask the DWP, have they done a mapping exercise to try and establish which areas of Scotland don't have the connectivity necessary to enable people to make their online applications? I was at a briefing with DWP just the other week, Presiding Officer, and asked some very searching questions, to which we were given the answers that for many of the questions they would have to come back with an answer to those questions. And the questions, I think, are fairly basic. For those that are unable, and I think the Citizens' Advice figures, despite what Mr Johnson says, I think are accurate in terms of their customers, in terms of the customers going through their door, which is increasing, ever increasing, due to the welfare reforms that we're now experiencing. But, Presiding Officer, the questions are fairly basic. Are you able to make an online application? And if the answer is no, then who is there to support them? Presiding Officer, Mr Johnson also said that there's face-to-face. The DWP have it there to ensure that people will have the face-to-face assistance that they require. Presiding Officer, how many staff are they going to employ with the appropriate skills to be able to enable that assessment and completion of the forms? What in terms of the mileage? What in terms of the time factor? In terms of visiting those at remote and rural areas, are they going to provide? How long is it going to be before people can actually make that application for the benefits that they're entitled to? Are they going to have to wait 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months before the face-to-face happens? How long do they need to be penalised because they have no access to that online facility? Presiding Officer, there's also an assumption that perhaps people could mobilise themselves and get into towns and use libraries or other facilities with internet facilities. There's many people with disabilities that don't have that freedom of mobility to do that. There's quite often the transport is not available to enable people in some of our remote and rural areas to get back, to get into town, complete applications and get back. It just doesn't happen, Presiding Officer. DWP need to take a hard look and mapping out the exercise and asking themselves very searching questions as to why some people will be unable to complete that online application. We've already heard that in places like Glasgow, for instance, nearly half of the people don't have internet access. That's not the entire client group, customer group of the Citizens' Advice. It's just a fact, Presiding Officer, that there are some people that don't have internet access, and even if they did, they might not have the ability to complete. Now, Presiding Officer, I support the advance of technology. I use it every day. But I can assure you, I also think that I am a fairly competent user of the technology available to me. But I have difficulty in completing many of the online forms that I have to complete. And quite often, I have to ask for assistance because the forms, although are deemed to be accessible, aren't usable in terms of the software that I would use. And for many people, the software they may have to use or to install in their computers, Presiding Officer, is extremely costly. And people don't have the finances to install that software if they're on a low income. Presiding Officer, we need to congratulate the Citizens' Advice for all the work that they do to try and ensure that they alleviate some of the hardships for many of the people in terms of trying to come to terms with the welfare reform that's been imposed upon us by the Westminster Government. It is incumbent of all of us in this chamber to ensure that we do what we can as MSPs to also try and alleviate some of the hardships for the people that come to us. But can I just say again to Mr Johnson, live in this world. Live in the world of many of the constituents, not in the world that Westminster paints for you. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I now call, lastly, Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to be called in this debate, and can I thank Christina-McKelvie for ensuring that we've been able to have it this afternoon, and also add my thanks to Citizens Advice Scotland. I think these views from the frontline reports that they've been sending in over I think probably the last year and a half, something like that, have been extremely useful, and I'm no doubt they'll continue to be so. I live in the G20 postcode in Glasgow, which is probably one of the postcodes in the city where you see the widest disparity in inequalities across it, because it stems from Great Western Road and then up north in the city and across Maryhill Road and further north than that. So I'm always kind of thinking about these issues, conscious of the number of constituents who will contact me to complain about the lack of services available online. It's quite a common complaint that I'll receive, that various services offered by the City Council, for example, are not available online, and some people, particularly at the southern end of that postcode, will be extremely outraged by this. And it's one of these issues. There's a hidden discrimination. There are lots of different elements to this, which I think Christina McKelvie is absolutely right to call it a discriminatory situation that we have around digital inclusion. You might be discriminated against for age reasons, that you've never had the experience of using some of this technology. Your disability might mean that easily and practically using technology is not something that comes too easily. It might be about a lack of infrastructure in your area, whether that's rurality or whether it's anything else, or it might be about your economic means and not being able to afford the regular direct debit to a broadband provider that most of us will do and forget about and not pay very much attention to. But it is a very real discrimination for those people, just as an example within that postcode, who will be completely cut out of the move of public services to online methods of delivery. And I think that's why Malcolm Chisholm is absolutely right to say, and Dennis Robertson said this, that we all support this. If this saves money, if it is easier for people, there's a whole range of reasons why we don't want to produce more and more paper for these purposes. We'd all be in favour of it. But the problem is when it becomes digital, as Malcolm Chisholm said, digital by default rather than digital by design. If you're going to make a change, then simply forcing or suggesting a target on it of 80% of these benefits applications must be made in this way, when it is completely practically impossible for that to happen, is really not very helpful at all. And there's just a couple of other points that I would make. One particularly is around, there's always an irony in government driving forward, IT advances from other people when we know how poor government itself is at IT. And of course there is a punishment in all of this for misclaiming. So if you make an error in any of this process, which might be about the fact that you're not used to using digital provision, or that digital provision is not available for you, then you yourself will then be punished by that system, which is frankly ridiculous. And when it comes to then how we support people, there is an issue. Yes, of course, we would want to see libraries assisting people to do this, but we can't put librarians in the position of being amateur welfare rights officers either, and aware that in that situation any error may lead to money being claimed back from the person trying to apply for the benefit. But I agree with most speakers on the government benches about this. Obviously, I disagree on the constitutional point, and I'm not going to get into it. I'll say I think when these things happen, there is always a responsibility to think what we can do about it. So when it comes to issues around training and skills and how we actually support people to be digital, I think there is much more that we can do. We should be conscious of some of the money that has been lost from that, and a lot of computer skills being described now simply as hobby skills. But I just particularly wanted to mention, the Presiding Officer, if I could, before I close, the example of St Charles's Primary School in that G20 postcode around the corner from where I live. And I don't know if they've been able to achieve this yet, but I've spoken to the head teacher there when we discussed some of these issues and how it's affecting the kids in the class there. And she said, well, if the parents of some of these kids could come in at 3:30 or whenever it is and pick up their kids, they could use the school's computers, and I would be really keen to try and do that. And that was an example of someone not just saying something bad is happening, it's not my responsibility to do anything about it. It was thinking, what practically can I do at every point in this to intervene? And it's not a practical solution to suggest that schools should open themselves up to all people in need of a computer for a benefit application, but it is a very small example of the practical steps that we could all think about taking, and the Scottish Government need to consider that too. And I look forward to the Minister indicating what steps she is indeed taking. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call on Margaret Burgess to respond to the debate. Minister, in 7 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would refer to my register of interest in my long past association with Citizens Advice Scotland. I'd like to also thank Christina-McKelvie for bringing this important issue forward as a members' debate. And I also commend Citizens Advice Scotland for another excellent Voices from the Frontline report. They're doing a super job highlighting some of the particular issues faced by people as a result of the UK Government's welfare reforms. And the report this morning, Offline and Left Behind, is more powerful evidence of the same. And I think there's very few people in the Chamber that I would disagree with what we've heard so far. And digital delivery of benefits is something that clearly concerns many members, not just those here today, but this has been something that's been raised on a number of occasions in this Chamber. And what concerns me most about it is the way the DWP is choosing to deliver benefits through the digital channel. Digital in itself is not the problem. I hope digital is the future. And in the future, and increasingly now, efficient and responsive public services delivered online are what many of us expect and demand. But some of the stories in the Voices from the Frontline report are quite shocking, and I hope they're not going to be an indication of how universal credit will be delivered. And I said before in this chamber from the backbenches, and I've also said it as a minister, the last time the DWP changed delivery of benefits from paper applications to telephone applications was a shambles, and people were sent from pillar to post, not allowed to make their applications using phones in the job centre, being sent to other agencies and in some instances public phone boxes. And I'm very disappointed to see that a similar thing is happening with the digital applications, when people are being rejected by the job centres and sent to Citizens Advice Bureau and other services to make their application. So I'm not as confident as Alec Johnson. I saw it in the past. I've argued strongly to get that changed, and the evidence coming forward is saying something different, and it's something I'll certainly be keeping an eye on. But those, the research the Scottish Government published last year is very much similar to what the research of Citizens Advice Scotland is showing, that people who are more likely to be able to go online are those that we've heard in a low income, living in deprived areas, having a disability or long-term health condition, and those with numeracy and literacy difficulties. In other words, people who will need the welfare state to be there for them. And those are the same groups of people that CAS have identified. And I also take issue with Alec Johnson that the CAS report was simply looking at their customers. Their customers are the people who will need and use the welfare system. They're the ones who will be needing to make the applications online, who have been pushed into making job applications online. And if we can't listen to that and recognise that, of course there's going to be a bigger percentage there, because they're the very people that are going to need the services. So I think that has to be taken account of. And I would say to the DWP that those people deserve a benefit system that meets their needs, rather than one that only meets an arbitrary target of getting 80% of claims online. And I know the figure has caused some concern, and it's highlighted again in the CAS reports. In simple terms, we can think about people who claim benefits in three groups. And there's a group of people whose circumstances are very difficult and very complex. And I would expect and sincerely hope that the people in that group would be in the 20% who can't use digital and will get support in other ways. And there's another group who want or will be able to manage their own claim online, and we all recognise that, and they'll be within the 80%, and there needs to be a good service for them. But there's also a group within that 80% who might not yet have the skills or able to access the technology. but the DWP still expect them to get online. These people are put in risk of making a claim that's late, making mistakes if they're not confident in a computer, and that could result in delays in receiving payment or potentially having their benefit sanctioned. And I think it was very clear in the stories that Christina-McKelvie said and others have highlighted. It's real people we're talking about, and it's their income. And if they don't get it at that time or it's late, they have no other source or no other access to money. They're really stuck in a position that they shouldn't be in. So forcing people to do something that they haven't got the access to do or the skills to use is quite simply unfair, and it is discriminatory. It could be someone, as we saw in the report, the 18-year-old claimant in Voices from the Frontline, that their health suffers. They could use the computer, but they can't get one. And that's the group of people that were most affected by digital by default. The people who maybe could do it but can't quite yet, and they need to be given the skills and the support to do it. And it's because of this challenge, and it might respond to some of Drew Smith's comments, that a number of local authority pilot projects funded by the Scottish Government are looking at digital issues. And there's very specific barriers in rural areas, and I think Dennis Robertson highlighted that. And we've given funding to a project in Aberdeenshire to look at that particular issue. There's also issues in urban areas, and again in Glasgow we've heard about the low take-up of digital in Glasgow, Clyde and Lanarkshire, where we know that broadband uptake is lower and much lower than the Scottish or UK average. And a project in South Lanarkshire is testing one approach through the one-stop shop council advice centres. And very recently we announced £170,000 of funding for a new 2-year project in Glasgow, helping get people online. Also, we can confirm that the Money Making Advice Work Fund can support projects that help people make online claims. Stream 1 of the fund is designed specifically for that, but transition to the new benefit system and to help people access welfare benefits. And I would encourage all organisations interested in providing advice to make a bid for that funding. And a further stream of funding has been ring-fenced for social landlords and the DWP to deal with digital by default, for which they can make applications for. So that's some recognition from the DWP, but it's not enough. But to kind of sum up, I don't question that a digital delivery of public services, including benefits, is necessary, but it's simply not good enough to introduce digital by default without providing the support and resources to ensure that it's accessible to everyone. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government will continue to raise our concerns with the DWP about the implementation of digital by default and on its intent of the welfare reforms behind it. Thank you.
Many thanks. That concludes Christina-McKelvie's Members' Business, Voices from the Frontline, Digital by Default, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.